And good morning and Happy New Year. Our last time we met was December 19th. We've had the holiday seasons and season rather, and trust everybody has had a good holiday season and ready to get back into what we're doing. So let's start. John, you ended our last session with a really great question. Like often you raise questions. And Mike, what does this mean to you? Notice this is 220B. We're following up from A, which was our last session. And um, I look at this section in John 17, verses 20 through 26, the end of the chapter, as really, these are the last words of Jesus in relation to the Father before he goes to the cross. It has everything to do with his intent in concert with the Father's intent. And I'm fascinated by what he is saying in this text. So therefore, it's not a surprise to you guys, but I have slowed it down. We're not going to just take, 2 weeks to go through this. But you asked me, well, why are we talking about science? That's what we talked about last week, and we're going to continue on this week. And I'll explain the reason, but it has everything to do with what Jesus is saying, although it's going to be kind of indirect at times, but it has everything to do with our appreciation, giving us some information so to expand our appreciation using modern facts in relation to our relation to Christ through God through Christ. So that's the whole point of this, John. And if you guys just bear with me, just know that I'm a curious guy and that I'm very respectful of your time. I don't mean to be wasting and going off on bunny trails by any means. And you'd be proud of me if you knew how much I cut out because of my own little, things that I get into. But everything relates. We're going to talk about science's contribution to what Jesus is saying, I and you and me, and they and us. I'll introduce the slide in a moment. And I think it's really a good idea to look at what modern scientific contribution to these ideas that can help us gain understanding in regard to what Christ has done and the relationship and the union that we now have through Christ. I just think it's fascinating. We're not trying to find the silver bullet or the secret sauce. That is not it at all. But I do think we have the privilege of living in the 21st century, and this is God's creation. And why not look at the physical sciences in order to enhance our relationship with Christ? Now, Tatsi, this is right up your alley. You're a scientist. I am no scientist, and I will, of course, admit that. But I'm going to be sharing some stuff that I'm excited about. This is probably old hat to you, and Tatsi, and anybody, feel free to enter in as we go into this part B that we began last year. So let's look at the first slide. Well, we're still on the first slide. It's all about seeing, how we see. Science, I view science as a friend and helps us to see. Not that we're looking for the silver bullet, but it helps us to see differently, thus we can appreciate. So I inserted this slide. We're going to pick up this morning where we left off 2 weeks ago, and it's all about how to see. seeing. When we come to a statement, now, case in point, here's the statement within the text. By the way, week 221 will be the text itself, but we're just pulling out a section of that text talking about the contribution of what modern science can contribute, that when we go to the text, it might give us really a much more comprehensive understanding of what he's talking about. But the portion of the text that really grabs my attention is Jesus praying to the Father, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us. That's a really familiar text to all of us. We've been in the faith, we've heard this, we've read it, and I am right, we're all right together, but there is a lot being said here. How can a physical man, Jesus, who is, of course, a mystery in himself, he's saying, praying to the Father that you are in me and I am in you. Well, what does that mean? And he's praying for whoever the they is, we'll get into that they may be in us, that whoever the they is, that they may have the union that Jesus is talking about in relation to the Father. I find that monumental. That is amazing. And that is his prayer. And so we're going to look at that. We're going to look at this in a number of different ways. We kind of get it. I kind of get it. I don't fully get it, and it's probably adequate. Yeah, because when Jesus spoke these words, and as the first century church read these words, of course, they got it too. It has something to do with union. And we're not trying to deep dive to the point where, again, I'll just make it very clear, to find the secret sauce. But I do think that, again, we live in the 21st century, and why not do a bit of a deep dive in what was in his mind when he was saying this. I don't think he was speaking over their heads. I think he was trying to get a point across, and that is union. The same point for us. But I think it's interesting to look at it in light of when we live right now. I think, and that's what I've said here. I think it's interesting to ask, how can we better understand what Jesus is talking about? It has everything to do with our appreciation. Now, case in point, we believe that Jesus had a knowledge base which far exceeded that of the disciples. And I think we can all buy into that. And what was true then is also true now. I don't think we are going to fully understand, though that's not the goal, but I think we can understand this at maybe some more depth than what was accessible to the first century believers or the immediate disciples. I think it reasonable to believe that when Jesus talked about it, this union that is within the text, there's more to it. And there's certainly some mystery and more to it than the disciples understood and what I currently understand. I think it fascinating, therefore, to access the information we have today and then to think about what Jesus said in regard to union. So, John, getting back to your question last time, that's why we're doing this, is to gain appreciation. Here it is. As a result, you and I, living in the 21st century, might grow in our appreciation for what has been given to us through Christ. So that's my only motivation in this whole part B, part A and part B, before we look at the text. Now, to illustrate this idea, before we move into the text, this is how I think about it. This text has three words: I, you, and them. It actually has a fourth that I'll bring in a minute. Jesus is talking about I and you and me, and they are in us. That is, again, that is mind-boggling. It has everything to do with union. I, I and you and them. It's a union, and that they are in us. Now the question is, who are the them? According to verse 20, which is part of our text, the they, which would be equivalent to the them, um, the they are those who will receive the word or hear the word through the immediate disciples. So we could look at that as the second generation. There are those who immediately receive, the 12, and there are those who will receive through the word of the apostles. That would be the second generation. And I think it's safe to say, at least this is my belief, is that they is equivalent to our they. That the whole idea was for Jesus to impart the word, which we'll go into more definition of what that is. The word was given to the disciples, and that was then therefore to be spread to the next generation and to the next generation and to the next generation. And now we're 21 centuries removed from that, and that same word. So I think he's talking about us. We are part, the we today, or the them are the us. And so it doesn't say us 21 centuries out, but I think through implication that is the idea. So I've known about this text for years, and you have too, and we've circled it, kind of like circling the wagons at whatever level we are. And that level is dictated by our preachers, by what our knowledge base, by our training, by our experience. And we've looked at it from a fairly close examination. What my intent is, through part B and through the next several weeks, as we look at the text and we look at science in relation to the text, a scientific fact which designed to enhance what we've been given, is that my little funky little diver, there it is. I had so much fun with this. My little diver is going to dive down deep, and we're going to look at it from a more zeroed in perspective. So I'm asking you guys to just go with me with this and just relax and enjoy what we're learning, ask questions, and think about it as we leave in relation to what we have been given through Christ. That's the whole point. Here's the text, and we're not going to deep dive in the text. We'll do the text next week. He says, I'm not asking on behalf of these alone. That would be the immediate disciples, but also for those second generation who believe in me through their word, first generation. That that is the comprehensive that they may be one. Oneness is a really big deal. Just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us. I illustrated that on the prior slide. So that there's a reason, so that the world may believe that you sent me. The world represents those participants, those people who are not yet part of the faith community, the world. And Jesus seems to be pretty clear on that. The world may believe that you sent me. We'll get into the text next week. Now, part A, I've got 2 slides on part A, and we're going to move really quickly. And we're going to move into how history has it's all about seeing how our eyes and perceptions have changed throughout history as science reveals interesting things about our life, and really more so even now in the 21st century. So last time we're doing a quick, very low resolution um, overview of what of history and science's contribution. Now, this is would represent this graphic the biblical world, and when the people in the Bible, and I'm lumping them, this would be a people over thousands of years, but technology remained pretty much the same. I tend to believe that these people believed in a flat Earth. I don't think they were heliocentric. Um, and they believe that the dome of heaven, when they speak of the heavens, the expanse, there's probably some sort of dome covering them. I can't prove that, but I'm almost sure that when the people in the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, first century, when they're praying Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of the Lord, their perception of what that meant is way different than how we pray that today. And it's just through what science has revealed to us of what the cosmos is really like. Notice the little circle here. I'm saying that in the biblical world, that they had a cap, they had an endpoint of how they would perceive it. It was big, but it's not nearly as big as it is in our world. The small world over here, there's not much activity there. The subatomic world, although that's not entirely true. In another slide coming up, and I'll give some facts on that. But this is their world. There's a cap on the big world and the subatomic world. The small world is really not really talked about. The world we live in is really quite different, and I think we need to respect that. Respect the differences in how they perceived and how we perceive today. Our big world is big, and notice the arrow moving off to the right, the big world arrow, and there's the small world arrow, and there's a mystery at the arrow tip. We know it's going, but there's no one around who has found the endpoint of either the big world or the small world. And it just so happens, according to one commentator I read, that we as human beings within our scale of where we live, we're kind of right in the middle of between the big world and the small world. But our world is different. That's the point of this slide, and we looked at it. Very quickly, we started to look at our recent history, and we looked at Galileo, who lived in the 15th, 16th century, known as the father of modern science. He advanced Copernicus's idea of the heliocentric world. Before that, all of humanity thought that we and the earth is the center of things, and because mankind is the center of things, Copernicus was the one who said, I think we need to see differently. And when that was first advanced through Galileo, the Catholic Church did not like that idea. They didn't like what he was. He was a heretic, and he was labeled as such, and he was in a house arrest. I don't think it was a prison, but it took them a while to warm up to the idea of what science was advancing. Later came Isaac Newton, not John Newton. Yeah, I thought that was kind of funny. 1643 to 1727. He saw himself as standing on the shoulders of those who had gone before. Steve, thank you for that. You sent me that photo over the holidays. This is on campus. The quote by Isaac Newton, isn't it?
Yes, it's on Well, it would be Pitkin Street, but as part of the campus, it's just
Yeah.
pedestrian bicycle zone.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but he's known for that statement, and that quote is on a piece of granite on campus. So in the science department area. He's known, Isaac Newton is known for his three laws of motion, which really were the, the beginning of the whole development of his whole methodology, Newtonian physics. And it's really the physics, the physical realities that's what physics is, the physical realities that govern a scope. And Newton's physical realities, three laws of motions, and then developed from there, were really developed into the idea. I mean, he's the guy with the apple fell out of the tree, and the idea of gravity, where there's a relationship between a large mass and a small mass, and there's an attraction that tends to happen there, and he was known for bringing descriptions on that, and resistance and um, um, everything based out of these three laws of motion. I want to keep going here. It's really interesting stuff. Now, to getting over here into the small world, there was some thought of it as early as the 5th century BCE. Uh, People were trying to think, well, what's in the small world, the world that of course, they didn't have the conception of atoms and the atomic world, but there was some thought. I don't know exactly what the thought was, but it really didn't develop until the 18th century CE by a fellow by the name of John Dalton, who really started to lay down some theoretical ideas of what that is. So it came much later. Um, and so this was the physics that you and I were raised on in high school. Those of us who took physics, this was primarily it. That it had to do with the governance of the big world, the world we live in, the Newtonian physics, or what's called classical mechanics. The idea of mechanics is the idea of the nuts and bolts of what makes things operate, the mechanics. And that's what Newtonian physics, classical mechanics, those are the terms that people use. Now we're going to move into new stuff. This is where I left off last time. And um, this is the slide we had before. And in the late 18th century, of course, the most famous scientist that we know, Albert Einstein, came into the picture. And Einstein's contribution, he was a genius, but what he contributed to the scientific world and humanity was just a way to see differently. Up to this point, it was I wouldn't call it a slam dunk. I don't really know. I didn't live then, but Albert Einstein really put some interesting twists on how to understand these physical realities. For example, and this is really this gets to be really interesting. Um, he thought of gravity. Of course, Newton uh, discovered and quantified it mathematically, how gravity works and the laws of motion. But Einstein gave us a different set of eyeglasses on how to see gravity. Rather than the attraction of two bodies, a small and a large, thus an apple falls to the earth, small to large, he inserted another entity within that relationship. And he called it the space time fabric, that there is another entity, the space space-time fabric. Think of it as a piece of fabric. Think of it as a grid where within that, on that grid, there is a space, that is a location, and time is velocity, location and velocity. So, on a space-time fabric, there would be a grid where you could actually plot a position, and then the idea of the velocity, what is happening. If I can plot a position of a particle on that grid, then the next question is, well, what is that particle doing? And that has to do with velocity. So we're going to talk more about that in the next slide. But think of it, this idea is this way. When Sandra and I did the best we could with kids, but one thing we did really well is we bought a trampoline. And that trampoline was really the center. We live across the street from a grade school, and our house, 520 South Washington, is where the kids played. When the kids were small, everybody was at Hador's house jumping on the trampoline. I would come home and walk through the kitchen, and there'd be kids in my refrigerator looking for stuff, and I couldn't have been happier. It was fun. And they were so creative with this trampoline. And what does that have to do with Einstein? Well, think of the trampoline fabric as the space-time fabric. Now, let's assume for a moment that the trampoline is somewhat level, so the fabric is level. And I place a marble on the fabric. That marble, if the trampoline is level, is not going to roll around. It's going to stay put right where it is. If I were to place a bowling ball on that same fabric in close proximity to that marble, what would happen is the trampoline fabric would be bent, and that's representative of the space-time fabric. It would actually bend, and that relationship and what is occurring through the space-time fabric would draw that marble to the mass, the small mass moving to the large mass. And so small things are attracted to, attracted is the wrong word. It's the space, it's the relationship. It's what's occurring in the space-time fabric that's causing the relationship to happen, and that's how Einstein thought of gravity. Again, the apple still falls out of the tree, but how to think about how the apple falls out of the tree is really quite a different matter. Now that moves us into the next thing that he came up with, and that's this idea of the space-time fabric. And the idea that we think is that a second is a second, and a minute is a minute, and an hour is an hour. And that's somewhat true. But in reality, according to Einstein, that time is relative. It's not constant. Thus, the space-time fabric has to do with what you've heard it, his theory of relativity. And there is a general and specific that I'm not up to breast with, but according to Einstein, the closer a particle is, or a person, to a larger mass, the more the time slows down. Time is relative. It slows down. And that's called gravitational time dilation. He's got a big fancy word for that. What is also true is the faster one goes, that time also slows down. That's why in our science fiction movies, you have the idea of the space guys going off and traveling at the speed of light and then returning, and they're younger than the people who on Earth because they have aged faster because they have gone this relative speed that has slowed time down for them. So what this means, getting back to gravitational time dilation, that's called speed dilation. So speed and proximity. And Einstein is the one that came up with these ideas. So I did a thought experiment that I thought was kind of fun, and I consulted ChatGPT. I'm having fun with ChatGPT AI, and so I put into ChatGPT. I'm 70 years old, and I live at 5,000 feet above sea level. Okay, and according to Einstein's um, law of relativity, how much older am I at 70 years than a 70-year-old person living at sea level because time has slowed down for them? And ChatGPT said I was right. That really made me feel good. And ChatGPT came back with this answer. I am 0.36, and you 0.36 nanoseconds, that would be a billionth of a second. I'm 0.36 nanoseconds older than a 70-year-old living at sea level. And I want to slam dunk say, living in Colorado is worth it. That's my joke. So you're supposed to laugh at that. I think it's worth that 0.36 nanoseconds because I get to live here and I'm very happy, even though it's right at zero today. So there's the space-time fabric. The whole point, we're having fun with this, and the whole point is that Albert Einstein, was a man who came into history and really contributed how we see differently. One more thing, and then we'll move on. Einstein also, this is probably what he's most known for, and you've seen it on T-shirts, you've seen it everywhere, that whenever someone's trying to state something that is heady, we see the formula E equals mc squared. And that is what he's known for, probably the most known for. Now, what that means is E equals energy, and M equals matter or mass, and C, the speed of light. So energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. That's what that means. Now, that doesn't really mean a whole lot to us, but there's two things I want to say. Number one is that there is a relationship. They're on opposite sides of an equation equal. That means there is a relationship between energy and mass. That mass just doesn't go away, it turns into energy. And energy turns into mass. That is a relationship. And that is something to keep in mind in relation to the reality of what we live in. Things are either energy or mass. And I think that is generally true. I think that's an important thing to remember. The second and most important part of this equation is that what this equation is saying is that a very minute small of mass is equal to a really large amount of energy. And if you were to Google this, you could go to, if you Google Einstein's theory examples, the folks at NOVA have given us an example. And this is really interesting. If you were to take a paper clip, just like this, you can see the paper clip. We all know what a paper clip is. And if we had the ability on Earth to turn that paperclip into 100% energy. Now, there's some problems with that because it would take a lot of heat and a lot of pressure. But if one could turn that paperclip into energy, the amount of energy would equal 18 kilotons of TNT, which is equal to the size of the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. Is that mind-boggling or what? That within matter, within our bodies, there is a whale of a lot more energy than that. And that is, that's one contribution. And Einstein, of course, if you watch the movie Oppenheimer, this, of course, would come into play. So Einstein, in summary, Albert Einstein served in the world of science as a bridge to help humanity understand and see things differently. And that bridge really opened up a whole nother world. So if we bracket what he is saying, it gave us a more comprehensive view. It opened up the door to not only the Newtonian physical world of the classical mechanics of the big world, but really gave way to what would be coming next in the small world reality of what is called the quantum world. And that is the bridge that we want to move to today. So our world today is different. We're not in the Einstein world. We've moved beyond Einstein, not and utilizing what his contribution is. The yellow grid or the yellow masking is our world today that is transposed over what has occurred, of course, not to nullify it, but to build upon it. In our world today, first of all, what we have is in the large world, we're talking about large world, then we'll talk about small world. We've had in the 20th and the 21st century, the launching of the Hubble, then the Webb telescopes. And I don't know if any of you have watched some of the photography and what has gone on, but these telescopes have been able to peer into the cosmos way beyond what we have been able to do with earthbound telescopes. And there is so much that we could talk about in relation to it, what they have discovered. But basically, one thing I find really interesting because I'm a follower of Jesus, is that according to science, and this is way out of my wheelhouse, but most people believe, scientists, that the universe is expanding. It's not over. It's expanding. Now, as a follower of Jesus and one who respects the Bible, that really affects how I read Genesis chapter 1 and 2. I was taught that Genesis chapter 1 and 2, now I'm not saying new things are being created. I don't know that. But new space is it's expanding. I was taught that this is how God did it in 1 and 2, depending on which one you follow. The two accounts are different. And this is the mechanic. I was reading it from a mechanic perception, and it was pretty much done. God created it, and it populated it with humanity, and that we're to operate within this created order in a certain way. And that is the perception. I think that is really, it's a really kind of a toddler perception in that if this is true, then how do I understand? I now read Genesis chapter 1 and 2 with deep respect, not as the mechanics of how it happened, but I see a God who is creating goodness and beauty, and he's calling it good. He's there engaged in humanity, and it's exciting. In the realm of poetry, in the realm of giving an explanation that there is a creation by one who is much bigger, and in that, and I think that that then can give way to the idea, this isn't all there is, but God is active in the here and now. It wasn't at one time, and now we're here to kind of manage it, but God is active here and now. And so this kind of thinking can can give us more appreciation to who God is and our relationship to God. Now that's on the cosmos side. On the small side, it's called quantum, which means how much in Latin. Some physicists talk about the idea of quantum is wave-like. We tend to think that science is going to find the most smallest particle, and that's going to be the one. That's where it begins. But in quantum physics, as these guys have deep dived down, I mean, we're talking about, I had one fellow talk about this is, well, if you take a yardstick and you divide it up into 1 billion pieces, it could have been more. And then you take one of those pieces and you divide that into 1 million more pieces. That gives you the idea of the size of a nucleus, which would be a proton and a neutron. And that is multiple size larger than subatomic particles. So it is so small that it is so small, quantum physics. And as the scientists are moving in that direction, what they're finding more and more, John White, is relationship. It's about relationship. It's not about the most smallest particle. It's about the relationship that is occurring in real time at that level. Now, one more. Oh, no, I got quantum. So there's all kinds of interesting things that we're going to mention a few of these and show some videos. But the quantum world, the subatomic world, is weird. And that's not my words. It doesn't act the same as the big world. There are different things that happen. One example of that would be called quantum entanglement. Entanglement means relationship. And even Albert Einstein called this spooky, but he acknowledged it. That what this means, if you have two subatomic particles, let's say electrons or photons, something very, very small, and they are in relationship circling around a nucleus, say, and these two particles will mirror each other. They're in relationship and they act in tandem with each other, either in concert or opposite, depending on the type of material or the type of relationship. If you separate those two particles, those subatomic particles, and it doesn't matter how far, light years away from each other, they maintain their relationship. And that just blows our minds away, because how can they communicate? They're obviously not communicating, but there is something much larger, John White, relationship that is holding those two particles in an entangled relation, regardless of their proximity to each other. And that is absolutely phenomenal. One more thing is...
Mike, can you just explain that one more time?
Well, I'll take I'll take a stab at it, but I'm a toddler. And there's all kinds of videos on this called quantum entanglement. But the idea of quantum entanglement, and this isn't just pie in the sky. I mean, scientists believe this. How they know this, it has to do with mathematics. I don't know. But the idea is once subatomic particles are in relationship, and the word is entangled. Like, let's say they're circling around, you got the high school physics thing in your mind with the nucleus and the electrons going around. Let's say you've got a relationship, and what that means is they are in tandem with each other, like this. If one moves, the other moves, and then that can be tracked. If those two subatomic particles are placed light years away, it doesn't matter how far, that they will maintain their relationship. And so what that is saying or implying is there's no way they can be communicating to each other. There is something larger governing that relationship. And of course, it's not a far leap for us to think about what that entity is. We call God Almighty, the creator of all things. But that's the quantum. Okay, that was my best stab. One more thing is, and there are several things here, but the uncertainty principle is the idea that, it's reasonable to think that as you deep dive down into the atomic and subatomic and get down to quarks and all of this stuff down there, pretty soon you're going to run into the final brick. Oh, that's it. That's the last one. That's the smallest thing that everything is made from. They don't find that. They find relationship. And the reason that the uncertainty principle, if you're looking for particles, you would be able to identify the location and the speed of that particle. And the uncertainty principle, founded by Werner Heisenberg, and that's when he lived, is that you can't do that. You have to pick. Either you pick the location or the speed, but you can't do both. And that ties into wave-like. Things are wave-like. A wave, like on a pond. If you drop a stone into a pond or a wave is not a point in time. It's made up of several points in time. There's a waving in and a waving out. There is, and we're going to talk more about this, but that speaks of relationship, not only of the individual particle, but the relationship of other particles at the quantum level. And it is, I mean, if you want to do the YouTubes are just full of interesting stuff like this. And I just want to say one more time, the more we deep dive, the more we come to relationship. John White is so good. He says, I think everything is about relationship. And I think you are a high percentage of correct. I wouldn't know how to refute that one. So as modern science is teaching us, because the expansion of the universe, I have the infinity sign. We live in a reality that is expansive in infinity in one direction, large, and also at this point, no one has found the smallest particle. It's a relationship among subatomic particles that also points to infinity. We live in infinity, and we're right here in the middle. Now, this is what I attempted to write about, and what really excited me in the book Birth Not Behavior. And I did this experiment where I was on the 100th floor of a building in New York City, an observation deck called The Edge. And what's cool about this is there's a protrusion from this building. It's a new building. And you walk out on this, you go outside, you walk out, and there's this glass floor. So here you find yourself 100 floors above the New York street, looking down through the floor. And then, of course, you can look up into the expanse as well. Well, I created a mind experiment when I was there, and I pretended there was a pair of glasses and I could look out into the cosmos, and it was ever, non-ending. And I looked down below and it was non-ending. And my last paragraph, I wrote a long story. Mike Hamill, my co-author, he really did a lot of editing. But back on the observation deck, I pondered my little thought experiment. And what this is the end result. I became acutely aware of what is actually true. I'm right, and I didn't say that. I'm in the middle of the space-time that extends infinitely in all directions. And I had nothing to do with it. No control over its beginning or end, but I've been born into it. I exist. I've been born into it, and I get to experience it and enjoying it, and it's my birthright, just like it's your birthright. Thus, the book, Birth, Not Behavior, is the name of the book. This realization overwhelmed me with a deep sense of gratitude and humility. Once in a while, we have these windows that open up, and that was one of those times for me of just how lucky, fortunate, whatever you want to say, we are that we get to live in the here and now in this wonderful place that God has given us. A couple of quotes, and then there's not going to be discussion today just because of time. But Barbara Brown Taylor, who I'd recommend reading, she's an Episcopal priest and she's a bit of a mystic. She writes, reality is not a well-oiled machine that behaves in a logical, predetermined way. I was brought up that way. I'm grateful for my background, but that's kind of how I thought. Instead, it's an ever unfolding process that defies precise prediction. In it, order and chaos are not enemies, but fraternal twins. Creation depends on both of them. Together, they shape life. Again, I would recommend reading her. She's got some really interesting things. A book I'm reading right now called The Soul of Desire. Curt Thompson, MD. He's a psychiatrist, and he wrote this. He stated exactly what I am feeling at this point in my life. God made us because he loves us, not the other way around. That means everything to me. There was a point in time where God thought of me and God thought of you, and he created us just the way we are. And that in itself is an act of love. We're not part of a human thing that he whipped out in some sort of machine, and that it's our behavior that determines his love for us. Thus the book, Birth, Not Behavior. He loves us, and he created us. Even now, the question is not, do you know this as fact? But rather, do you feel it in your bones? Because if you don't, it is not, if it's not embodied in what you sense, in what you image and perceive on a moment by moment basis, it's not yet fully real to you. This is what has happened and is happening to me. And it took me, it's not like arriving. I'm not saying that at all. But Curt Thompson is stating what's been in my heart. And it's taken me, I'm 70 years old. But at 70 years old, I'm beginning to have more of an appreciation for what I have been invited into. and how much God loves me and loves all humanity the same. And he's stating that, and I wanted to share that with you. We got to wrap up. It's 8 o'clock, but this is how I see it. We're going to end the slides here. We got our world now, not with arrows moving in both directions, but now we have the infinity sign, just saying that we live in a very big and complex place. And I had nothing to do with it. You had nothing to do with it. We were born into it. It's generally accepted that this reality expanding is like an inflating of a large balloon. And I like this analogy because if you take a balloon and blow it up, if you put 2 dots on a balloon, like magic marker dots, and you blow on that balloon, as the balloon expands, those dots will move so there's more space between those 2 dots. And that's the idea. That's how I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but I think that, well, I would say most scientific people accept the fact that our universe is expanding. The thing we stand on, even though there is no attachment here, is quantum physics, because that, in my view, is the basis of all reality. Everything that we know of, we call matter. Everything is made up of subatomic material. Therefore, the quantum reality exists in all around us. It's the basis of everything. The Newtonian physics is an expression of the quantum. It's not one or the other. It's not that, well, if you're talking about the small world, we're talking about quantum physics. And if you're talking about the big world, we're talking about Newtonian physics. I don't believe that's true. I think the Newtonian physics is that's what we're used to. And it's part of the quantum reality that exists. No, and Albert Einstein was the man who came into history, and he helped us to see differently. And that's it. I don't apologize because we had a lot of stuff to cover on this slide. We're going to move into next week. We're going to look at the text itself. But down here, right here, the point, let's see here. The point of all this is how we see dramatically influences what we see. And I'm suggesting that, I can't really change this here. Within this session, I suggested modern science not as an enemy, but as a friend, and that can help us understand, like we talked about today, there's some really interesting things to think about. And if God is the creator of all of this, how does that help me think about God? Wow, that is something that is something we can dwell on. Next week, we're going to move into 20 and 21, and we'll look at the text itself. But before we did that, I wanted us to cover this kind of an overview of science's contribution, and we'll make reference to this from, in the next few weeks. So thank you all for joining. Thank you all for joining in. I'm sorry we don't have a discussion, but we got to sign off, and we'll see you guys next Wednesday, and we'll get into verses 20 and 21. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mike.
Interesting. Be nice to hear what you're up to these days, Mike. What's going on, where you're at, what you're doing. I don't know if you can hear me or not. So, anyway,
I think we're shutting off.
okay.
Well, have a good week.
Okay, very good. Good to see you, Steve.
Likewise.
Okay.
So long.